class. Things are going well. Most of you are doing well and it's going good. So if you're getting the kind of feedback you like, Rambo, that's great. Couple quick comments. It is Canvas you're working in and you're dumping in text. I highly recommend writing your text elsewhere, Microsoft Word or some such, and then pasting it in, because we still have folks that get halfway in and bump a button and, oh, I didn't mean to. And it also, your paragraphs look different. One quick hint, if you need to show paragraphs, sometimes when you're dumping the text in, if the lines are nearly the same length, it just looks like you don't have paragraphs. Even just 2 enter keys will make a thing in a Word document that'll look more like a paragraph in your dialog box. Anything else, Bo, while we're talking about? Yeah,
Great.
Yeah, things are looking good. Today we're doing things a little different. As if you looked at the schedule, we have some films, which is exciting and new and different. And then we'll save the last 20 minutes for questions, but I'll let Cindy do some introductions there.
All right, thank you for joining us here in the room, and I'll see you guys online. So today we're going to be looking at 2 films that were documentary films that were done by Jessica Plumb. Jessica Plumb is an award-winning filmmaker and writer known for her exploration of the relationship between people and the land and waters, and is the principal and creative director of Plumb Productions, a multimedia storytelling company specializing in short films focused on the environment, people, and place. Plumb holds a BA from Yale University and an interdisciplinary MFA from Goddard College. She is currently a guest lecturer at the Seattle Film Institute on media and the environment, and a Salish Institute fellow. So one note to make is in the stuff that went out to everybody, it said that she did these films as she was a fellow for the Salish Institute. That is not true. She did these films separately, but other things as part of her fellowship. So, but these are wonderful films. We're going to watch it's a trilogy, so we're going to watch the first 2. They're about 11 and then it's like 17 minutes each, so first half hour. And then Jessica's going to come on and answer questions that you guys have. I do want you to remember, online and in person, is that she is not a scientist, she is a filmmaker. So if you have questions about the science of the stuff in there, she may not be able to answer those quite as well, but she will be able to about the process of making the film and what she went through in doing it. So without further ado, we're going to watch the first one called, I have the right one up. I managed to put the wrong one on the share, so let me fix that. Oh my gosh, go. Okay, here we go. Share, and I want to do Call of the Orcas. There we go, Call of the Orcas first.
Calm seas, resting whales, 30th September 2019, off False Bay.
Why are these whales so remarkable? They're intelligent as we are. They're social as we are. They're successful as we are. But their success is being cramped by our success.
To understand anything in nature, you have to study it on its own time scale.
When Ken and I started in the early 1970s, we had no idea that there were 3 completely different forms of killer whales on this coast, and they lead totally different lives. The resident killer whales are unlike any other mammal out there. The southern residents in particular in this area are iconic. They are such a magnificent animal.
They are more likely to be gregarious. The breeches, the spy hops, the tail lobs, the indescribable bursts of joy that you see. And they're also more attuned to humans.
Our people, since time immemorial, have shared the same waters. Our relationship with the southern residents is we grew up being told that Quahomachton are people under the waves. So We know that they're just an extension of our family, that they put on their regalia, then it allows them to live under the water.
Southern resident killer whales were considered to be so abundant that they could walk across their backs on a sunny day. There were permits being allowed for capture in the 60s and 70s that were based on the premise that there's hundreds of these animals.
And nowhere in that permit process at the time were we consulted. I don't even understand how it was allowed to happen. They just did not know enough about the structure of a pod. Residential schools happened to us. Our children were taken. Those captures were the same thing. The young were taken. The wild was taken out of them and they were taught to perform. Naming the whales, numbering the whales, I believe that work was super important because that helps teach the greater population the importance of every individual orca.
I was just fascinated with whales in general, and when I, along with others, discovered that we could tell them all apart individually with photography, I thought, well, if we can do that once, why don't we do it annually, and we'll keep track of something that we otherwise have not been able to find out, and that is how often do they have babies, how long does it take to grow up, how long do they live?
This was really the dawn of the application of photo ID, a technique that Mike Bigg developed.
We were shooting +X Kodak film at the time.
We started to realize these animals are family groups. They're matrilineal, female descent kin groups, and individuals are born into the group and stay in the group for life.
I think that a lot of people thought it was crazy that you could actually identify these animals individually through the nicks and scratches and so on and so forth. People were seeing a lot of whales, or at least they thought they were. What they were in fact seeing was a small number of whales that just moved around a lot.
Ken's photographs confirmed what Mike Bigg knew about the number of JK&L southern residents, and the number was finite.
The first big impact they had was putting a real solid permanent end on the capture era out here in the Pacific Northwest.
Now we've got the first baby boom. There's a period of joy where there's these babies are being born. There's a population of just increasing numbers, and numbers are individuals, and these individuals are healthy and seem to be doing well.
Their society is so much like our society, where we're both subsistence fishers.
Young whales have to learn what it is that their mother or grandmother has to teach them about catching fish, about vocalizations. Different societies of killer whales have different prey items and have to learn different things. Basically, our whales here, our resident whales, are a salmon culture.
No one saw what happened in the 1990s coming.
We found that they're not foraging randomly from the population of salmon in their vicinity. that they're selecting for the most rare species, Chinook salmon.
A lot of those Chinook populations they rely on are themselves threatened or endangered in various states of decline. The southern residents are essentially always one bad day away from being in some real trouble nutritionally.
What I'm looking at in the southern resident killer whale population that I study is a slow motion extinction.
Our lives are so intertwined because whatever affects us affects them. You rule out the salmon, we're going to cease to be the salmon people. Our culture will not survive without salmon. They won't survive without them.
There's no one person or even one organization that's going to save the southern resident killer whales. There is a community of scientists working on decades of work that came before us, doing everything we can.
Well, they're looking for a fecal sample. Let's hope they got one. I'm hearing approaching whales. There we go. Nice little group.
What better life could you have than one of inquiry and discovery? You know, it isn't man against nature, it's man with nature. And that's the only way it's gonna work for either one of us.
Okay, so that was Call of the Orcas, and now we are going to move to the second one called Managed to Extinction. Stop. Thank you. And I'm just going to get out of that so that it'll stop dinging in the middle of everything. And back to the Zoom. Share this one. There we go. All right, here is Managed to Extinction.
My name is Jay Julius, and my traditional name is Quatathlum and Slayoakton. I am a member of the Lummi Nation. I'm a fisherman. People will refer to my people, Lummies, as people who were maybe here a long time ago. I've been here my whole life. We never left. You may not have seen us on the land, but we slept and we fished everywhere out here. When I was a child, it felt like everything was alive. we all face the same struggle, right? The southern residents, the salmon, the people of the sea, the people of the islands, Lummi. We're hungry for what once was.
Whales have always been my favorite animal, and amongst all the whale species, killer whales have always been at the top. They're just an incredibly interesting and easily relatable group of animals. The southern resident killer whales are obligate fish eaters. They only eat fish. And preferentially, they eat Chinook salmon.
You learn a lot when you fish. I mean, it's probably my greatest education took place on the water. I started fishing personally probably, I don't know exactly when, but maybe when I was 2. My relationship with the Salish Sea kind of began then with my father and my uncles. And that's when my relationship with the southern residents, Quathalmachtin, killer whales, orcas, began as well. We harvested and fished side by side.
Jay Julius is a fisherman, former chairman and councilperson at Lummi Nation, and president of the indigenous-led nonprofit Cecilia. Jay was a leader in the successful campaign to protect Cherry Point from a proposal to build North America's largest coal port there. A visionary leader.
We share a common struggle. In just 16 and a half decades, we are where we are, and we're being managed to extinction through a process, and it's us included. And killer whales are being managed to extinction, salmon, and my people, and Chairman Wheeler's people. Years on the East Coast to drive Atlantic salmon to extinction and everything that is. And now you're sitting in a place where it's happening on our watch. Even in my short lifetime as a fisherman, what was once rich, we're trying to get back to 85 numbers right now.
The southern resident killer whales are one clan, one unique population of killer whales that occupy the Pacific Northwest. And within that clan, there's J-pod, K-pod, and L-pod. They're all connected genetically and culturally and linguistically. They all speak the same language. Knowing them now as individuals and as family members, they're tight bonds. Even in the face of starvation, they still will share a salmon. Salmon of even 70, 80 years ago would have been approaching 100 pounds. Over the past 5 or more years, the average size of a Chinook salmon in Washington state is 12.5 pounds. So when we're talking about this large-bodied, long-lived animal that has to eat several hundred pounds of food per whale per day, that's a lot of extra foraging that has to happen for them to find 10 or 12-pound salmon to meet their basic daily caloric needs. I think they're asking for our help. I've had an opportunity to get to know and work with Jay Julius. We talk a lot about fish. We talk a lot about fishing.
What means everything to your history? I'm not sure how to relate this to the world because I don't know Other than money, what is everything in your life to you that keeps a roof over your head and keeps your family connected? That's salmon. It's just been our everything, and we don't want to let that go. We refuse to let that go.
Fish on! Fish on! Woo-hoo-hoo! We are salmon people, but there's a season for everything. When the dandelions bloom, that's when we know it's halibut season.
The tribes can't take responsibility for this place we're in now as far as the depletion of the numbers that were in 1855 to where we are presently. We signed the treaty, but when we signed the treaty in 1855 as Lummi Nation, the salmon, the Quethalmachtan, the Salish Sea, and the rivers were signatories too. Yes, we do harvest, but it's with respect, with an understanding that there are covenants, there are relationships, and there's unwritten laws we have to follow. And what happens to them inevitably happens to us. How do you blend that spirit and ceremony from indigenous people and that relationship-based living with nature, with science, and the world around us that controls everything?
We collect killer whale feces with the assistance of a scent detection dog. By utilizing a scent detection dog, we are able to stay really far away from the animals. It allows us to ask questions about stress hormones and eliminate our boat as a potential confounding factor. We can look at nutrition hormones, pregnancy hormones, so we can tell if a female is pregnant or was recently pregnant. These females are getting pregnant, but they can't keep their pregnancies because they're nutritionally deprived. Up to 70% cannot bring their calf to bear. The southern residents are literally starving.
No word in our language for famine, going hungry. That was never, ever, ever a part of our history. I think to help create empathy around this conversation, it is one of the biggest challenges we face, because if the outside world, hearing someone speak about salmon, they might be thinking Costco or Trader Joe's, or why don't they just go to the store and buy some? If you can imagine, since the beginning of time, we like to think that we grew from here. It's our place of belonging. But things were here long before us. We know that humans are never created first. It's always the earth, the rivers, the sea, the animals, the four-legged, the ones under the water.
The fish don't see a border. The whales don't see a border. We're the only ones that see a border. Fish exiting their natal river from Oregon, Washington, BC, Canada, the vast majority of those fish go to Alaska. This is something that has happened since time immemorial. This is what salmon do. And yet we're allowing fishing to occur in Alaska that is not sustainable for runs that are native to down here. The whales are not factored in at all to the quotas. I do not think that the tribe portion should be touched in any way. The rest of the fish, non-tribal commercial and recreational fishing, it's those fish that I believe the southern residents should be allocated a portion of.
You have joined several letters calling for lower Snake River Dam removal as essential for the sake of the orcas. Why?
I think we'd be hard-pressed to find any killer whale biologists that don't call for the Snake River dams to be removed. These are animals that co-evolved eating Pacific salmon. we're closing off an incredibly important habitat. And in the case of the Snake River, fish have to exit 8 dams to get to the Pacific Ocean and 8 dams to get back to their spawning grounds. That's really how we have to be thinking about recovering this population of whales, is making sure that the fish that they rely on have healthy ecosystems to return to.
Thousands of miles of blockage for salmon for the purpose of resources, power, money, justified for freeways and roads and cities. Us humans, we're almost thinking we're godlike, disrupting this beautiful art and creation and painting and making it fit our needs around what means the most: tala, money, power. We have to right those wrongs if we want to have a future and not have your kids looking back 100 years from now saying, oh wow, there used to be killer whales and salmon.
The thing that I'm right now most excited about, which we are just embarking on, is a collaborative project to analyze the killer whale feces to be able to extract prey DNA and be able to say, right now, we know this whale ate 12 to 24 hours before fish from these rivers. I see that information coming out of the prey DNA as being one of the most, if not the most critical thing, because that will allow us to provide that information to wildlife managers who are tasked with recovering these whales. We will be able to tell the DNA from the prey from any of the river systems that the whales are foraging from. It won't matter whether or not they're coming from Canadian rivers or US rivers.
We're talking about the Snake River here, the Columbia River. What's taken place? Our ancestors entered into an agreement, not a privilege, a right, reserved a right to fish. An Indian treaty is not an Indian treaty, it's your treaty too, for those of you who are non-Indigenous. I think just honoring those treaties is a huge solution to the future of the existence of my people, other people, the rivers, the salmon, the orca. How can we live together in tune with one another, marry ceremony and spirit with science before it's too late? To reverse the wrongs and evaluate who we become as people, as policymakers, as citizens, I think we really need to examine our way of life. I believe we can change, but there's got to be a change within each of us. That's my hope. So what does that look like? It looks like new babies born healthy in the southern resident family. Everything's alive. Everything that belongs and was once here returns, and there's abundance. And there's respect.
All right. So there we go there. I put this down. And then I'd like to pull up and introduce Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Hi
there.
I thought maybe you could let them know what the third part of the trilogy is about. So if they want to go and look at that later.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you all for taking time to watch part of this trilogy this afternoon. And I can't think of a better place to do that than by the shores of the Salish Sea at Western. The third film, we decided to film right across the border because it felt like we couldn't tell a story fully about the threats facing our orca population and salmon without also spending some time in British Columbia. And so the third film is primarily set in and around the Fraser River. And one of the things I really appreciate about that film is that it, like Managed to Extinction, features a pairing of scientists and Indigenous leaders, but there are also some really strong young people in that film. And when I think of the trilogy as a whole, loosely, I think of it as a set of stories about the past, the present, and the future. And so the film that's set in British Columbia to me also feels like a film looking toward the future, especially with some of the young people featured in both science and um, protective roles in the Salish Sea. So, yeah, it's called Shared Water, Shared Crisis. It's the longest of the three at half an hour.
Wonderful. All right, well, now is the time to ask any questions that you might have of Jessica and the film process. And I know we have online too, but does anybody have any questions from in the room? Yep.
I was wondering about the title of the second film. I guess I wasn't quite seeing the connection with Managed to Extinction. Do you mind explaining that, please?
So I'm going to repeat it for the online audience. She's asking about the name of the second documentary, Managed to Extinction, and what the connection was with the documentary.
Thank you so much for asking about that title, Managed to Extinction. Basically, I drew that title from something that Jay Julius said on screen in the film when he's pictured in town hall speaking to a much larger audience. And it's also a theme that came up from some of his peers across the border in the third film. What Jay means by that in the context of this story is that the choices that have been made at the policy level affecting our overall salmon populations, which then impact the health of orcas or southern resident killer whales, are choices that, in his view, from his vantage point, may lead to extinction of some populations. And this is something that came up on the Canadian side of the border as well, particularly with one of the Indigenous leaders featured in that film, who also spoke about policy choices, in that case, on the BC side of the border, that put certain runs of salmon at risk. So Managed to Extinction is a way of talking about extinction that has a human choice component that, in theory, we could make choices to manage differently. Again, I'm directly quoting characters in two of the films in that title.
Yeah, and there's another term that some other whale scientists use is bright extinction. So
Yes,
we're literally watching it. We're visible to it. We know what's going on, and we're watching it happen.
Before our eyes. Thank you for bringing that up. That one of the characters in the third film also speaks to that language, bright extinction, as in we know a lot about these populations, and yet we're watching them dwindle before our eyes.
Yep.
Good question. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Oh, you both got one online? Excellent.
How long does it take to make an 11-minute film? How to build trust with people you interview?
So the question is, how long does it take you to make an 11-minute film? Like, how many hours of footage do you have for 11 minutes? And then how do you build trust with the people that you're working with?
Thank you for sharing a filmmaking question. I always tell audiences I'm a filmmaker first, not a scientist, although I spend a lot of time with scientists. This total trilogy was an hour by the time I was done with it, and the whole trilogy together took approximately 2 years to complete. That 11-minute film actually started with a slightly longer version, which we shortened for the purposes of just this type of screening, to be able to use it in classrooms and the like. And I probably spent, let me think, somewhere between 4 and 5 months working on that film, which I know sounds crazy for 11 minutes. The math of documentary filmmaking is a little hard sometimes for people to wrap their heads around. I shoot hundreds of hours of footage often to create even a shorter film. And I do that for a lot of reasons. I'm always doing intensive editing, trying to figure out how to distill the story. And also, you asked about building trust. And so, even for a short film, I really take time to get to know the people who will appear in the film. And when we do sit down to do interviews, even when I know that that person may only be on screen for a minute or two, I want to give that person a chance to unfold their full story as they wish to tell it. So, every interview you see was probably at least an hour of film time, even if the person that is introduced is only on screen for a minute or so. Finally, I think the trust question is a super important one. And I've had this privilege over the course of my career now for close to 2 decades of filmmaking in and around the Pacific Northwest and around the Salish Sea and working with a lot of indigenous communities. And I don't identify as a member of those communities. I've spent a lot of time trying to build trust as a filmmaker. And one of the ways that I've done that is to invite folks in as collaborators and also to invite the terms that these characters and communities want to set in terms of how they engage. Most documentary filmmakers ask people to sign forms that, sign away a lot of rights for a long time. And we work on those forms together first to make sure people are comfortable with them. So those are all ways I've tried to build trust. At the end of the day, there's no substitute for time, in my view. So I really put a lot of time into each project to try to get to know people and their stories deeply.
Awesome. Yep. Bella.
The first one is, have there been any changes to these resident killer whale populations since this film was created? And second question, what was the most moving part of making this film?
Okay, so the first question is there any changes to the orca population since the making of the film? And then second one was, what was the most moving part? The most moving part. I can answer the part about the orcas if you don't want to, Jesse, or don't know.
No, please do. But the short answer is the number has gone up and down ever so slightly from the moment I started the films. And if you want to give the current count, Cindy, by all means, please do.
Yeah, I don't have the number in my head, but it's basically remained stable, if not going slightly down by one or so every year. We've had a couple deaths, a couple births, and then some of those births didn't last. So basically since 2023 or so, it's remained around 71, 72 animals, if not dipping down a little bit.
That's exactly right. And, we are talking about a very small, highly threatened population at this point. The second question that you asked was, what was the most moving part about making this film? And boy, there were many moving moments for me as a filmmaker. First and foremost, I want to say that while I was not able to shoot some of the very close-up footage of southern resident killer whales or orcas because they are endangered and you need a very special permit to do that, I did have the opportunity to spend time on the water with whales. And for all of us who have done that, in my case, I did it with scientists or sometimes even from land, keeping the appropriate distance. The sense of life in this population, watching them play and be together, never ceases to move me and the other people who have been around them for a long time. Even the scientists who've studied these whales for decades, when we're actually in their presence, to some extent, I think everyone feels like a kid again because being with them is magical. There are two other things that were deeply moving to me, even in that first film, and they're are key moments from each film that I'll remember. First of all, that first film centered around Ken Balcom, and you hear his voice at the very end, near the end of his life. And as it happened, when I was first asked to make the first film in this series, Ken was sadly very ill. And I had, although I did not know it at the time, the privilege of a final interview with him before he passed away. And so most of that film was made posthumously. And we hear the voice from that interview just very briefly at the end. And I recognize that that was a privilege and an honor. And I just want to, extend again my gratitude to his whole family that I was able to do that. The other piece that was very deeply meaningful to me from that first film was the opportunity to hear directly from Ellie Kinley, who's an elder who lives right in your area outside of Bellingham. And hearing her talk about the ways in which the experience of the orcas parallels the experience of the indigenous communities around the Salish Sea is something I'll never forget. And I hope will stick with you as well. There are many other moments, but those are three really big ones for me.
I will have to say I'm a marine mammal researcher, and I've been doing it for a very long time now, for 25 years. And we had orcas come into our pass. We don't get to see them very often. We do porpoises and seals, but like my assistant and I were both like, "Oh my God!" So it is something different about getting to see these animals. The privilege of it.
It's spectacular. Always spectacular.
Yeah. Question? Any more? Oh, yep.
Remind me, I know we covered this in the film, but I was taking notes on I forgot a few, but what are some of the efforts to get the Chinook salmon population back to 85 levels?
The question is, what are some of the things they're doing to get the Chinook salmon levels back to levels at 80, 1985, which I think is what Jay Julius mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm going to reiterate that I'm not a scientist, but I've been listening to people talk about this for many years now as a filmmaker. And as actually some of you may know, that my first feature film in this region was actually about the restoration of the Elwha River here on the Olympic Peninsula, where I'm based. And that is perhaps one of the more spectacular examples of habitat restoration that's occurred around the Salish Sea. Reopening many miles of excellent spawning habitat, specifically for Chinook, on a river that's largely protected by Olympic National Park. That is but one example of the strategy of habitat restoration, and I'm happy to report that I have watched good habitat restoration projects unfolding on both sides of the border all around the Salish Sea, and it is certainly one of the pieces of the puzzle of addressing the issue of the Chinook population. Another habitat restoration example appears in the third film, and it concerns these long jetties in the Fraser River estuary that are blocking juvenile salmon on their outmigration, and the very recent decision to actually breach those jetties in a couple of places. Habitat restoration is one piece of the puzzle for Chinook salmon. Another piece of the puzzle concerns policy and fishing policy, and that's a really, really tricky one. I want to acknowledge that, I live in a community in Port Townsend where there are a lot of people who make their living from fishing Chinook up in Alaska and in the fisheries between here and there. I think the tricky part about the Chinook fishery is, as explained by one of the scientists in the third film, Chinook have a different life history than the other species of Pacific salmon, which make them more vulnerable to our current fishing practices. Some have described them as the only salmon that we fish on the grounds on which they are also rearing. Also, Chinook used to, or typically, were at sea for a longer period of time, up to even 7 or 8 years, which is why they became the biggest salmon that we have in this collection of salmon that appear in the Salish Sea. And that's why they're also really important to orcas. People love them, orcas love them, because they're the biggest and fattiest salmon in the Salish Sea. So there are changes to policy that could be considered on both sides of the border, and that would require coordination all the way from Washington through BC to Alaska, that would allow more Chinook to return to their terminal fisheries or the places where they were born. And that is another piece of the puzzle that is open for consideration. We've seen that dam removal worked on the Elwha. I got questions in advance about the possibility of dam removal on the Snake River. I think, as you heard in the film Managed to Extinction, pretty much every scientist out there who's interested in the health of our orcas is also an advocate of dam removal, particularly on the Snake, which offers significant Chinook habitat. So those are just a collection of ways. There's no one silver bullet, is I think the most clear message I've taken away from following this story for many years. There are multiple approaches to increasing the Chinook population over time. And it's going to have to include a combination of harvest policy changes and habitat restoration. If anyone else wants to weigh in, Cindy, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, and the restoration piece is important because if they don't have the place to rear and stay safe until they get bigger, there's really nothing else that's going to help. So the restoration is a really key part. But you're right, there is the how much is being fished by different groups. There's pollution, right? The 6 ppdq goes down and particularly hits coho really hard. So there's a lot of different things that can be done and are being done to that. Policies in regards to restoration and things like that are going through. There are now policies where they're trying to amend the Marine Mammal Protection Act so that they can kill seals and sea lions because they see those as competitors for salmon survival. So I urge you to go out and learn about that and make your voice known on how you think that should go. But there's lots of parts to this, and as it said in the movie, in the documentary, there's no silver bullet. There's no one organization that's going to save them. There's no one thing that we're going to do that's going to fix it. It has to do a little bit of all these things to be able to make it the best place for the salmon to be able to survive. But one of the biggest things is they need the habitat in order to do so. And that includes the rivers, the streams, the estuary, and the ocean, right? That's what's so complex about them.
I absolutely want to second that. And one thing I have seen as a filmmaker is that I've had the opportunity to bear witness to success stories. And that is something that I always want to share because I know there's a lot of bad news out there. But here in the Salish Sea, we have multiple examples of major habitat restoration successes, the Elwha dam removal process being but one. So I think it's important to look at those and learn from them.
Yeah, when you remove the dams, the salmon come back. Like the salmon who never had been there before go, "Ha, this looks great," and they go. Like it's amazing. Even the scientists and people who know the thing really well were surprised at how quickly they saw salmon returning to these places that got restored. So yes, well, it will still take time. It's not going to be immediate, but they start doing it pretty quick, which is exciting to see.
The image behind my head is, I don't know if you can see it. It actually looks like it's quite bright on me. I can try to make it bright. The image behind my head is actually of the Upper Glines Dam on the Elwha River after removal and of that former reservoir coming back to life.
Yeah, and there's the Klamath, which is now the biggest dam removal in the U.S. Yeah, there's going to be a documentary out about that one as well. So I highly recommend looking at Jessica's for the Elwha dam removal, the documentaries there, and the Klamath, watching the dams come down and the nature return to where it is, like it should be, is just, it's an amazing experience to get to watch. So I highly suggest checking that out. So a question online?
What are your hopes for the film and what role could they play in the conservation of orcas?
What are your hopes for the films and what is the role they can play in the conservation of orcas?
Thank you so much for asking about my hopes for the films. You know, I would not do this type of work if I weren't absolutely passionate about the potential for impact of these types of films. Being a documentary filmmaker is not a way to go out and get super rich. So for those of you in the audience who are wondering about that, I want to assure you that these are projects that, well, confirm they're projects that are labors of love often. I would love to see these films help to stimulate conversation about the things we were just talking about. This is exactly how I love to see these films used, which is to get people asking and talking to each other about what can we do to help recover these populations? How can we work across the border? How can we work between different, worldviews and experiences? One real theme for me of this whole series was the potential for bringing together traditional indigenous ecological knowledge and the best practices we have in our science community. And one of the things that makes me really happy about how these films have been used is that they have, in fact, been fostering these exchanges in life between some of the people in them and their communities about how to amplify that potential. So that is a way I'm excited to see the films used. They're now available formally through a distributor called Bullfrog for educational purposes. So that means they're available broadly to universities and classrooms, which I'm really happy about. and they're available for community screenings, which means that communities that touch the Salish Sea have the right to organize these, all three films or each of them separately, into community screenings that bring people together. And I have been attending those regularly over the last number of months and plan to whenever I can going forward, including on the Canadian side. Those are all different ways I'm happy to see them in circulation. That's far more important to me than whether they ever end up on some big streaming site.
Awesome. And just so you know, at Western, we did buy the perpetual license. So those three films, anybody, any teacher that you have can screen them for the classes for free in perpetuity. So if you like it, and tell your other teachers that they should show them in their class. And with that, class is up. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you all. It was a pleasure to join you today.